Welcome to Nancy Goodaim, Space Ranger, and this is Chapter 8. And there's a lot of background noise at the moment, so there might be a little bit of skibobbling in the background, but hopefully not enough to distract you from the story. Anyway, a hen, a daw, a tree, and away we go. There are two sides to every coin, just like there are two sides to the story of the beginning of the inaugural interplanetary voyage by a Martian spacecraft. There was the story of the two Martians, Martina Ruddersplich and the Sheriff, and then there was the story of ESA Mission Specialist Nancy McGinley and ESA Mission Specialist Bart McMorrow. They both happened simultaneously, but it's probably best to start with the human side. "I don't trust Nancy," said Bart. He made sure that they were alone on the habitation deck of the Martian rocket before he spoke. The deck below them was a large two-storey cargo bay. The deck above them held the control room, where the Sheriff and, in Bart's opinion, seemingly untrustworthy Martina were controlling the ship. Well, Martina was controlling the ship and the Sheriff was supervising. At least in his own head he was. All three decks were connected by means of a spiral staircase that climbed the edges of the body tube. The ship had gravity. Martina had given Bart and Nancy a very long-winded explanation involving proton balls and an Ongogulon spire, which Bart took to be gibberish. But the presence of gravity ran counter to that. "Why don't you trust her?" asked Nancy. "Well, the thing is, it's hard to put into words, Nancy. But, now, what it is, there is an absence of something suspicious, which makes me suspicious." Nancy looked puzzled. The habitation deck she was in was comfortable by human standards, with a half-dozen soft chairs in a main living space, 4 well-furnished bedrooms on one side, and a toilet boasting what looked like a Victorian bath, and hot water. Martina Ruddersplich and the Sheriff had been at pains to explain that the rudimentary facilities were due to the restrictions imposed by space travel, and had even apologised. They'd been very hospitable. I mean, they're both risking their lives to help us. Neither of them seem to have any interest in saving Bud on Fernt. So all this is really just for our benefit, said Nancy. "Which you have to say was decent," she added. "More like suspicious, Nancy. And did you notice the way the launch went perfectly? No issues. No sign of space madness from anybody. None. And neither Martina nor the Sheriff got irritated when we couldn't get our heads around the gravity thing. I'm telling you now, Nancy, I smell a rat. Something's not right. Mark my words. This is all going to go pear-shaped and Martina's going to show her true colours. Which are the colours of a deceiving extraterrestrial. And then you'll be rethinking how decent she is. No, it's just not right. Because it's all right. Like I said, the absence of something suspicious is suspicious." Nancy took a minute to reply, which was more time than she had, because at that point the hatch to the control room swung open and the Sheriff climbed down through it, closed the hatch behind him, and waddled down the spiral stairs until he was level with Bart and Nancy. "There's something suspicious going on," he said. Bart and Nancy did not reply. "Are ye not suspicious?" he asked. "I am," said Bart. "I don't see anything to be suspicious about," replied Nancy. "Exactly," said Bart. All three of them fell silent while the Sheriff made a theatrical attempt to let Bart and Nancy know he didn't want Martina to overhear them. He did this by pointing his index finger upwards to the roof and the control room beyond, placing his hand on his mouth and shaking his left arm over and back. He then flashed a thumbs up at Bart and Nancy. Bart shrugged, and Nancy looked puzzled for the second time in quick succession. "You'll have to use words if you want us to understand," explained Bart. "Martina is plotting to sell us as slaves to the Jupiterian Space Force." The Sheriff waited for the impact of his statement to sink in. Its effect was underwhelming and caused him to up the ante. "Which is the worst space force in the solar system? It's really just a private army for Sosman Borgstapel, who's a complete gobshite." The Sheriff waited for a reaction. "Can you say that again?" asked Nancy. "I knew it," said Bart. The Sheriff nodded. "Martina thinks we know nothing about space travel, and that I wouldn't recognise the coded messages she's been transmitting to Jupiter Spaceport. But I did. And they sell all three of us up the river," the Sheriff continued. "I don't know about you two, but I don't fancy spending 10 dipples in the Jupiterian Space Force, let alone the rest of my life." "We'll have to kill Martina," concluded Bart. "Nancy, You're handy with the crossbow. You do it, he suggested. Nancy shook her head. She could tell something was awry with their intergalactic escapade, but was unconvinced by the sheriff's story, or Bart's suspicion of nothing. No, Nancy said. Martina has been good to us so far, and if there's one thing my time with the European Space Agency has taught me, it's that you have to judge people by their actions. Ah, Bart. What about all the rest of your time back on Earth? And the evenings and the weekends when you weren't working? What did they teach you? Nancy froze. A cold chill ran down her spine and her vocabulary failed. Ugh, she said. She said. I can't seem to remember anything outside of my time on the mission, she stammered. Come to think of it, me neither, noted Bart. But that doesn't mean Martina is not a conspiring extraterrestrial rocket ship captain. Good, said the sheriff. I'm glad you agree. He then did his index finger upwards, hand on his mouth, left arm shaking signal thing, which once more received a respective shrug and look of puzzlement. For obbledy-gong's sake, ye Earthers are almost as thick as Jupiterians. Here, I spell it out for ye. I'm going to go back upstairs and tell Martina she needs to come downstairs to discuss the dinner menu with ye, so she's not suspicious. Then I'll get 3 knocks on the hatch, and when I do, you have that crossbow of yours ready, Nancy. The minute you see her Umtogian vestibule poke through the hatch, let fly with a bolt. And if that doesn't kill her, the fall to the floor here should do her in. Good plan, noted Bart. Thanks, said the sheriff. I thought of it myself. He said that I thought of it myself part loudly, as if to convince himself as much as Bart or Nancy. Nancy thought this strange, or at least slightly more strange than an interplanetary voyage in a physics-defying Martian rocket ship with a dopey human, arrogant extraterrestrial sheriff and suspicious Martian space captain, which made it very odd indeed. Nevertheless, events seemed to be getting ahead of her ability to reason, and the best plan seemed to be to go along with the impromptu assassination, but stop short of killing the only intergalactic traveller capable of operating the rocket. The sheriff then retraced his waddly steps back up the stairs to the hatch leading into the control room, opened it, went through the hatch, and closed it behind him. Roughly 6.8749 seconds later, Bart and Nancy heard 3 loud knocks, which were followed by the hatch opening and Martina Ruddlesplitch's leg descending through it. They were followed by her rump, which was followed by Bart shouting, "Quick, Nancy, now's your chance. Shoot her in the tiddly fong, whatever the sheriff said." Nancy had her crossbow drawn and aimed at Martina, but didn't fire. Martina, once her head and torso joined her legs and rump on the winding staircase, spotted the weapon. "Excellent," she said, and smiled. "Just perfect," she said. "That couldn't have gone better." The sheriff carefully poked his head through the hatch to see what couldn't have gone better, and looked puzzled, which was not surprising, because he only knew part of the Martian side to the story of the beginning of the first interplanetary voyage by a Martian spacecraft, and the part the sheriff was familiar with went like this. Martina Ruddlesplitch had boarded the rocket through the Umtoglian aperture and brought ESA mission specialist Nancy McGinley and ESA mission specialist Bart McBorrow and the sheriff with her. Once they were on board, Martina retracted the dorsal ladder and gave the 2 Earthians a quick tour of the 3 floors of the rocket. The cargo bay and living quarters were pretty boring, and Martina didn't spend long showing them to her passengers, but she did make a big effort to describe the control room. Unfortunately, she couldn't get past an explanation of the proton balls and ongological spire configuration for the gravity drive, partly because the sheriff kept interrupting, and partly because the basics of Martian cosmology were alien to Earthers. In any case, Martina figured the best bet was to let the Earthers stay down out of harm's way on the habitation deck while she launched the rocket. And the launch seemed to go smoothly, something she was extremely proud of. Proud enough to remark so to the sheriff, who suddenly became suspicious. "That was a little too smooth for my liking, Martina. Something must be up. Remember the words of the great Martian detective Bongerlon Chupstow. When you eliminate the probable, what you are left with is whatever notions come into your head. And my notions are telling me that those 2 Earthers are plotting to sell us to Sosman Borkstapel as Martian slaves. Are you sure this is not just a touch of space madness setting in, Sheriff? It seems a little far-fetched." "I'm very sure, Martina. In fact, I've never been more sure of anything in my entire life, which, as you know, has been a very important life." Martina pretended to be busy with the controlling for several dipples before offering a reply. And when she did, the reply was, "OK, you are indeed a very important man, Sheriff, and it would be foolish of me to doubt the notions of a very important man like yourself. I think we should do something to give those notions the oxygen they need to be proven, which, of course, will take great bravery and skill from you. Nothing new there, Martina. I killed glimps for breakfast. Are you sure about that? You had a bucket of standard breakfast in the canteen number 861, this morning. And you've only ever had breakfast for as long as I've known you, which is as long as you've been alive. It's a metaphor, Martina. I should have known a metaphor would be too complicated a thing for you. Just take it that I'm brave and skillful. Martina nodded slowly and sincerely. I absolutely do, Sheriff, which is why I came up with a plan to give these Earthers their comeuppance, and why it involves you. And that plan is for you to go down to the habitation deck and tell the Earthers I've formulated the very same plan as them. Sell yourself and myself to Sosman Barkstaple? Nancy shook her head slowly and sincerely for a second time. Almost right, Sheriff, only my plan would involve selling you and the two Earthers to Sosman. Martina glanced over to the hatch leading down to the habitation deck and lowered her voice. I want you, Sheriff, to go down to the two Earther friends, yes? Bart and Nancy, interrupted the Sheriff. Yes, them. And tell them of my plan, and convince the crackshot one to fire a crossbow bolt at me, with the intention of killing me. Then come back up here, close the hatch, give them a signal, and I'll go down. But won't that plan end up with you being killed? No, Sheriff. Not if I'm right. Not at all. The Sheriff did not really see how the mechanics of the plan stacked up, but not wanting to show that he did not really see how the mechanics of the plan did not stack up, opened the hatch, climbed down to the habitation deck, and returned 8 dipples later. He then nodded to Martina, gave her a thumbs up sign, knocked on the hatch 3 times, and opened it. There you are, Martina. The plan's all over to you now. And it was. And she climbed down through the hatch and said, Excellent, just perfect, and that couldn't have gone better. Martina then stuck her head back up through the hatch into the control room, nodded, and gestured for the Sheriff to follow her. You can put the crossbow down, Nancy, she said. I think you might have already guessed. We all just got hit with a bout of outer space madness. I knew it, said the Sheriff. Knew what? Said Bart. Martina will tell ye. Martina climbed to the base of the staircase and stopped short of the hatch leading down to the first floor / cargo bay, and sat facing Bart and Nancy. This entire journey has been a hallucination. An instantaneous bout of outer space madness. Very same thing that did for the first 2 Martian space missions before they could even take off. Martina stretched her arms out with the palms facing upwards. Only we're still alive and have it beaten. Plus, no time has passed, so we're still on schedule. Bart shrugged for the 3rd time. Nancy put away the crossbow. The Sheriff flashed a shaky, confused but not wanting to seem confused thumbs up at Martina, and then, just so we covered all bases, gave the same style of thumbs up to Bart and Nancy. He coughed, cleared his throat, and began climbing in through the hatch to the control room. Right so, let's get on with the journey. How long will it take to reach Jupiter, Martina? He asked. Martina didn't answer until she had retraced most of the steps back up the staircase to the control room, which took roughly 4 seconds, which was long enough to be sure Bart, Nancy and the Sheriff all heard her reply. No idea, Sheriff, but we're about to find out, she said. And well done to you if you managed to listen to that. Chapter 9 is next week, and that will be kind of a bit of a more serious tone. The story's on a 9-beat kind of rhythm, so we've 8 a mess and then one more serious sort of to focus back into the other plot. Anyway, thank you.